You're checking out The Rerun, YouTube's newest furry and retro gaming nostalgic podcast, and I'm Retro Coyote. How's it going, guys? Today we're going to have a little bit of fun, and we're going to react to a video here. This is a video from Ahoy. Now, if you don't know them, they are kind of a documentarian about the history of gaming and pop culture and stuff like that. They had a really good video on the history of the first video game, which is amazing, and they have a video here about 2000, about the year 2000, I think. I haven't seen this video yet, so we're going to react to it. But before we get into that, if you enjoy the content here on this channel, then guys, please make sure to like and subscribe. We're growing our community all the time, and I'd love to have you with us. Also, if you want to support the channel a bit more directly, then please check out our Patreon. There's going to be a link in the description below. Check us out there, and it gets you a shout out at this point in the video. That being said, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to check it out, and we're going to discuss and react as we go.
"2000 was an exciting year. It was 1990 no more, and a whole new millennium beckoned with potential. It was a transitional year for gaming too. A generation of consoles was coming to an end, and the battlegrounds were littered with failed machines. The 3DO, the Sega Saturn, the Atari Jaguar. It wasn't a console war, it was a massacre."
That's true. That's absolutely true. The fifth generation of game consoles, which is to say the generation of the Sega Saturn, was also home to more successful consoles like the Sony PlayStation and N64. But it also had a lot of other of those lesser known consoles, and they were lesser known with good reason. They were awful.
Nintendo were still standing.
Yep.
Their N64 had found a family-friendly niche, particularly in the American market. A steady stream of Mario games helped, and 2000 gave us Paper Mario, Mario Tennis, and Mario Party 3.
Yeah.
One of the biggest N64 releases was Zelda Majora's Mask, a follow-up to the hugely successful Ocarina of Time, and while Majora's Mask didn't sell quite as well, it garnered critical acclaim and a cult following. Another N64 classic, Rare released Perfect Dark, a spiritual successor to GoldenEye. It lacked the Bond license but didn't lack ambition. The game pushed the hardware to its limits.
And dude, Perfect Dark really does have a cult following. Anyone who, it's like the Dreamcast. If you like Perfect Dark, you freaking love Perfect Dark.
The visuals were very impressive, but the frame rate less so. Compared to other platforms, the N64 had relatively few releases, but the games that were released were generally of a high standard. It was the home of the big mascot games, like Banjo-Tooie, Kirby 64. But the biggest franchise at this time was Pokemon.
Yeah, it was.
In 2000, Pokemon Stadium released in America and Europe, and quickly became the best-selling console game that year. It sold 1 million copies in its first month. The only thing that could outsell Pokemon Stadium was Pokemon Gold and Silver for the Game Boy Color. On its first day of release in Japan, it sold 1.4 million copies.
Oh, dang.
In its first few weeks in the US, it sold 2.9 million. 12% of all video games sold this year were Pokemon titles.
And this was at the height of Pokemania, guys. I can't really overstate how huge it was at the time. This was around the time the first movie and Pokemon the Movie 2000 had come out. I saw both of those films in theaters. There was the Burger King toys. It was everywhere. You couldn't swing a cat without hitting something Pokemon themed. Not that I would swing a cat, but you know what I mean.
This was good for Nintendo, as they were facing strong competition in the console space. Mobile gaming was still in its infancy, and the only realistic option for handheld play was the Game Boy. Pokemon was huge, and so Nintendo dominated the handheld market. Nothing else came close to the sales of Gold and Silver, but there were a few other notable releases for the Game Boy Color. Metal Gear Solid was the handheld debut of the Metal Gear series. Wario Land 3 continued the handheld exclusive games featuring Wario. So, while Nintendo were buoyed by their handheld success, the N64 wasn't as secure in the market as they might have hoped. With a new generation looming, Nintendo were no doubt planning how to take on their biggest rival. 5 years into its life, the Sony PlayStation was still doing numbers. It had outsold the N64 by a ratio of 2-1 and was dominant in the European and Japanese markets.
Sounds about right.
Thanks to its popularity in Japan, CD-ROM storage, and support from Square, it was the place for JRPGs. Final Fantasy IX, Vagrant Story, and Dragon Quest VII all released this year. In theory, the N64 was the more powerful platform, but hamstrung by cartridge size and memory latency, the PlayStation kept pace in the 3D stakes. Third-person action games like Siphon Filter 2 were standard fare. First-person shooters like Medal of Honor Underground tapped into the rising popularity of shooters on consoles. The textures were low-res, the polygon count low, and the controls often clunky. But this was the generation where 3D graphics became the expected norm. 3D opened up the potential for new genres and allowed home consoles to offer arcade-like experiences. The PlayStation had established itself as the home of driving games. It had Gran Turismo, after all.
Yep.
It had variety too, from serious driving simulators like Colin McRae Rally 2.0 to the crime-fueled Driver 2. If you were a sports fan, PlayStation had all of the big yearly franchises: NFL, NHL, FIFA. Skateboarding games were surprisingly popular at this time. The Tony Hawk series was topping the charts, and the release of the sequel elevated skateboarding to new heights. The explosion in extreme sports led to imitators like Dave Mirra Freestyle BMX and set the stage for similar games on the forthcoming generation. While Nintendo had the lion's share of mascot-led games, there were a few family-friendly titles that intruded on Nintendo's turf. The Spyro series had its third entry with Spyro Year of the Dragon, a cutesy 3D platformer. And the popular Crash Bandicoot series had Crash Bash, a party game in the Mario Party mold. In short, the PlayStation had more games suitable for more ages. The games were cheaper, cooler, and more varied than anything else on offer. It also helped that it was easier to find pirated games.
Yep, discs let you do that.
Sony were newcomers to the console scene, and in less than one generation had installed themselves as king. And if that wasn't enough, they were preparing to unleash a devastating blow to their rivals. Meanwhile, the PC was doing quite well. While the console wars were brutal, computers had long since consolidated to IBM compatibles.
Yep.
The closest rival was Apple, who had been struggling for years and were only starting to make a recovery.
That being said, in terms of games, like gaming in general, it was all on console. You did have your PC holdouts, but they'd been doing their own thing on PCs for years, and you weren't going to get them to change.
As far as computer gaming was concerned, the PC was the only choice, and over the last decade they had become a common purchase for the home. So with an install base in the tens of millions, there was a sizable audience for PC games. The biggest selling PC game of 2000 was The Sims, a life simulator game from the creator of SimCity.
Yep. Oh man, how many Sims did you kill? Let me know in the comments.
It was a unique game that appealed to an unusually wide audience, and it did rather well as a result, selling 6.3 million copies by 2002.
Wow.
There were many expansion packs and sequels that followed.
And so many mods.
Another hotly anticipated game was action RPG Diablo 2, Blizzard's follow-up to 1997's Diablo. RPGs had long been a staple of PC gaming, and Blizzard had a great reputation at the time with the success of Warcraft and Starcraft. So, it's perhaps unsurprising that Diablo 2 ended up as the fastest-selling computer game ever.
I got friends that still play Diablo 4.
players were spoiled for choice, really. This year also had Baldur's Gate 2 from BioWare and Icewind Dale from Black Isle.
Oh, yeah. I had a friend that loved that game.
Another classic PC genre was strategy, and one of the highlights of the year was Shogun Total War, a meaty slice of turn-based planning with 3D real-time battles and the opening entry of the Total War series. The popular Command & Conquer series had a return to form with Red Alert 2.
And it's crazy to see how now a lot of these strategy war games are on mobile. it's honestly kind of surprising. And you know, the user interface in general does tend to lend itself to a mobile platform to an extent, but it's just crazy to see how they've kind of migrated onto the mobile space.
After the divisive Tiberian Sun, the alternate Cold War setting was welcomed, although it wasn't quite as good as the original. 3D stealth action games were en vogue too, likely due to the popularity of Metal Gear Solid.
Yeah.
IO Interactive gave us Hitman Codename 47, an open-ended assassinate 'em up.
I don't know.
And
This is
Looking
from that
Glass
early
Studios
on.
released Thief 2: The Metal Age. A Hail Mary from a struggling studio which, despite critical acclaim and healthy sales, failed to save the company from bankruptcy.
Yeah.
One key advantage of PC gaming that the consoles hadn't yet usurped was online play. The internet was rapidly becoming more and more popular,
Oh yeah.
and for most people, the first, if not the only, device to be connected was the PC. Games like Quake 3 Arena,
Quake.
Unreal Tournament, and Team Fortress Classic had installed themselves as online essentials, and this was the year that Counter-Strike made its debut.
Ah.
Backed by Valve and the Half-Life name, it found instant popularity. The realm-based tactical FPS remained popular for years afterwards, topping play count rankings.
I got friends that still play CS:GO.
The PC market was challenging, however. The sheer breadth of software available meant that many games, no matter how critically acclaimed, didn't sell particularly well.
Yep.
Take Deus Ex, for instance, a first-person action RPG that was hailed as the pinnacle of PC gaming, festooned with awards, and retaining a cult following today. It sold about 138,000 copies in the US in its first year. There was a lot of competition for shelf space, and the big boxes didn't help. The PC market had a lack of cohesion, and the consoles were starting to gain ground. Even PC stalwarts like the point-and-click adventure were struggling. The golden era of LucasArts was over, replaced with an endless string of Star Wars games.
Yep.
Many great PC exclusives of this era failed to gain the traction they deserved. The operative, No One Lives Forever, was a deft blend of camp 60s espionage with first-person stealth action, and it was very good. It received critical acclaim, with some reviewers comparing its innovations to those made in Half-Life. It sold 36,000 copies. Of course, some flops were more deserving than others. Daikatana came out this year too. It was supposed to be the next big FPS from John Romero to exceed Doom and Quake. A promise the game couldn't uphold. Iron Storm forecasted sales of 2.5 million, but its poor reviews scuppered any chance of a hit. It sold just over 8,000 PC copies in the US in its first few weeks. History remembers it as one of the biggest commercial failures of the era.
Yeah.
There was just no room for mediocrity. The PC had more games available than any other platform.
Those aren't that bad in
The
terms
players
of
didn't have bottomless
70s
wallets. 7 out of
passes.
10 isn't good enough when the shelves are filled with 8s, 9s, and 10s.
Okay, that's fair.
So the PC needed a new approach to selling games, one more flexible and with fewer overheads than retail. But until that solution arrived, AAA game development would become increasingly centered on the consoles. The worst was yet to come. The next generation of consoles had just arrived, eroding the PC's graphical advantage. The new hardware was ever more capable of handling 3D graphics, and provisions were made to satisfy the rising popularity of online play.
And, you know, if I'm going to play a modern game, I'm probably going to play it on a console. Because, I mean, I can't afford a gaming PC that would run it. And I can't afford to get a new gaming PC every, 5 to 10 years? Every time it stops being able to run the new game. You get a game console these days, you're good for like 10 to 15 years. Runs it just fine. You don't even have to run it potato mode. It'll just run normally. It will work. For the most part. Cyberpunk 2077 notwithstanding, obviously. But you understand what I'm saying. Well, that console is made to do nothing but play games. PC is not purpose-built for that.
The next gen was a threat. First to market was Sega's Dreamcast,
Yeah,
launched
boy.
the previous year. Sega had struggled during the last generation, with a lukewarm reception to the Saturn and an alarming tower of failed add-ons for the Mega Drive. With Sony taking pole position, Sega couldn't afford any more mistakes. The Dreamcast was developer-friendly, able to port both PC and arcade games easily. It was powerful, came equipped with a modem, and the price was fair. It felt fresh and new, and had a fantastic array of colourful, interesting games. It had a good start. Crazy Taxi was a perfect port of the arcade original, a fast-paced, zany 3D drive-em-up where you have to deliver passengers to their destination as quickly as possible. It was a must-have. It showed off the next generation's capability and tapped into a cultural vibe in a way that few games can.
Yeah.
The cel-shaded Jet Set Radio was similarly cool.
Talk
An
about
urban grind-em-up with jet-powered inline skates and a killer soundtrack.
one of my favorite games of all time.
Weirder still was Space Channel 5,
That
a
one's really good
campy
too.
rhythm game where you repel an alien attack by matching actions. It's got a cool 60s sci-fi theme, and Michael Jackson even makes a cameo. Most baffling of all was Seaman, which released in North America this year. I'm not sure what drove Sega to make such weird games, but I'm glad they did.
Facts.
There was nothing else quite like it, and the Dreamcast needed a strong array of games to stand a chance.
And I can't really overstate how poised the Dreamcast was to succeed. It really did have everything going for it. I mean, you've heard everyone and their dog tell you that the Dreamcast was ahead of its time, but I don't know if that's entirely true. It was perfect for its time. It really was. I mean, it had a great library of games. It was easy to develop for. It had the online capability right out the box, and it was the first to make it to market. It had everything going for it. And then PlayStation 2 came out and said, "Hold my Mountain Dew. You can't play DVDs though." And that was all she wrote.
Exclusives were a big deal, and while Sega may not have had Mario, the Dreamcast was the only place you could play Sonic Adventure.
For now.
It was also home to Shenmue, which released in the West this year. An ambitious action-adventure life simulator game that was the most expensive video game ever developed
And
at
I've
the
never
time.
played it.
It was good, certainly unique, but not quite good enough to recoup its costs,
Yep.
despite selling 1.2 million copies.
And I don't know how true this is, but speaking of open world games, I heard that there was talk, and it may have been just talk, and I may not know what I'm talking about, but but I heard that there was talk of them porting Morrowind over to the Dreamcast. Can you believe that? And I swear to God, if some indie dev came out and mods the crap out of Morrowind to run on the Dreamcast, I'd get it. I'd buy the hard disk, even though I don't use disk for my Dreamcast anymore. I'd buy it to support that effort, because that's just impressive.
Still, it was only on Dreamcast at the time, so it served as a pretty good incentive to adopt the system.
Yes, true.
The PlayStation may have had Gran Turismo, but the Dreamcast offered a strong alternative in Metropolis Street Racer, a racing game with an open world and innovative kudos scoring system. In fact, the Dreamcast had most of the PlayStation favourites covered. There was a port of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2,
It was pretty good.
and it had its own exclusive version of Resident Evil with Code Veronica. There were a slew of sports games, with all of the major sports covered. Some major franchises were notably absent, but passable alternatives existed. Honestly, the Dreamcast had a really solid library, especially considering how young the console was. But despite their best efforts, Sega couldn't instill confidence in the Dreamcast's future. EA weren't interested in developing for the platform, nor Squaresoft. The Dreamcast was good. Great, even.
Okay. Come on, man.
Born anew in
Stop
blood
teasing
and
me with the
fire,
game I want, but I
the
can't
Prince of
play because I don't
Destruction
have that
awakes.
Xbox
Who
yet.
now
Stop it.
But it wasn't a PlayStation.
That's true. It was not a PlayStation.
Sony had built a very powerful brand over the last few years. In a time awash with bad decisions and risky purchases, the PlayStation was always a safe bet. And now, it was time for the PlayStation 2. The PS2 launched in March in Japan, October in North America, and the following month in Europe. Anticipation was sky high, with PS2 scarce on shelves and $250 million in revenue taken.
I remember when we got our first PlayStation 2, my dad went to, I think it was either Funko Land when they were still around, or GameStop. He traded in a bunch of his store credit, able to pick up PS1 when it came out or soon after it came out. But I mean, it was absolutely incredible. Like, I had the Dreamcast first in my room because we just had it stored away in a closet, and I'm like, "What's this?" It's like, "Oh, it's a Sega console," and I was hooked from there. But when we got the PS2, it was like, this is on par with Dreamcast.
On the first day alone, 1.4 million were sold in Japan in its first month, and 10.6 million consoles globally in its first year. Sega already knew they were in trouble, but the strength of PlayStation sales by the end of the year made it clear that they couldn't continue. So soon, the PS2 was left standing as the only next-gen console on offer. It was the logical choice. It could play DVDs after all, and cost about the same as a standalone DVD player anyway. Unusually for a new console, it was backwards compatible with the original PlayStation.
Yes. And the DVD player, I can't overstate what a big deal that was, because this was at a time when people were transitioning from VHS over to DVDs. And like the man said, it cost about as much as a DVD player anyway, and it was backwards compatible with a lot of the games you already had. So, I mean, it was the smart choice.
You could carry on playing your favorites until something new arrived. The complement of launch games for the PS2 was a mixed bag.
Yeah.
Enough to cover most genres, but the best was still on the way. The annual sports games were perhaps the most important for the launch checklist. EA had the NFL, NHL, and FIFA franchises ready to kick off the next generation. More interesting was SSX, a snowboarding title that scratched the same extreme itch as the Tony Hawk series.
Yeah, it was awesome.
It was originally a Dreamcast title, but after EA lost confidence in Sega's console, development shifted to the PS2.
That's true.
Driving games were another important part of the PS2's launch lineup. The next Gran Turismo was a year away, so in the meantime there were a few other next-gen options. Ridge Racer 5 was an arcade racer from Namco, praised for its tight racing and next-gen visuals, but criticised for a lack of anti-aliasing and limited content. Rockstar Games were gearing up to dominate the new generation and had 2 racing games on offer ready for launch. Midnight Club Street Racing was a city-focused game with illegal races between exotic imports. Smuggler's Run was an off-road expedition with buggies and other rough-and-tumble vehicles. Fighting games were another popular genre. Tekken Tag Tournament was a spin-off from the popular Tekken series with a new team fighting mechanic. Dead or Alive 2 Hardcore was an updated version of the arcade game for the PS2, regarded as the best of the genre at the start of the generation. The new and exciting first-person shooter genre was starting to make headway on consoles, with the PS2 receiving a port of Unreal Tournament. Not a patch on the PC original, but it's hard to beat local multiplayer action.
That's true.
The exclusive Time Splitters was much better received. Its varied gunplay and characters meshed with better suited gameplay to the console. For third-person shooting action, you had Armored Core 2, a mecha game by From Software.
Armored Core is
Dynasty
awesome.
Warriors 2 was a large-scale strategic
and I know some
hack and
people
slash.
are really in Dynasty Warriors. I never got into it, though.
The PlayStation had a reputation for great RPGs, but the selection on offer at launch for the PS2 was underwhelming. Best of the bunch was Summoner, a 3D Western action RPG from Volition. From Software were also quite prolific, building on the success of their King's Field series. They had 2 games ready for launch, Evergrace and Eternal Ring, although neither were received particularly well.
Never heard of either of those. Huh.
Dark Cloud was originally intended to be a launch title, but slipped to later in the year.
Yep.
A Zelda-style JRPG, it was the best of its genre in 2000, although this wasn't the highest bar to clear. With retrospect, the launch titles for any console pale in comparison to those released once it finds its stride, and the PS2 was no exception. but the basic needs were covered and many great games were in the pipeline.
Got some
With
really
the massive
good DDR
hype
games
surrounding
too.
the launch of the PS2, Sony couldn't fail to make an impression.
Welcome to Take 5 Royal Change.
Hey, how long will this take? I'm kind of in a rush.
Oh, just 10 minutes.
Get out! 10 minutes? Y'all are like...
A well-oiled machine.
Come on,
I was gonna go there, but then it felt obvious.
get out of here. Be gone.
With a strong launch and practically no competition, Sony had put themselves in the driving seat for the next generation. The PS2 was a capable system with 3D graphics that looked truly next-gen. From the messy, brutal console wars of the previous generation, a clear victor had emerged.
Yeah, and you know, with all the USB ports, which again were a new thing at that time, weren't as widely understood as they are now. There's so many ways to soft mod that console, and there's so many awesome things you can do with it. And eventually, it did get its online capabilities as well. I really can't overstate what a big deal the PS2 was.
Sega had been bested and were planning their exit from the industry. The 3DO and Jaguar, nothing but a distant memory. Nintendo remained and were preparing their next-gen competitor.
Yep.
But they'd been in the shadow of the PlayStation for a while, and with the PS2's head start, they had a mountain to climb. Even the PC was feeling the effects of the PlayStation's influence. Although the last decade had been great for the adoption of the platform for games, the lack of a standard configuration made it difficult to target.
Yeah, same.
There is something to be said for the simplicity of a console, and the monolithic hardware was starting to become more appealing for both consumers and developers. Microsoft knew this, and with their financial might, they saw an opportunity to challenge Sony's dominance in the console market. Essentially, a PC in a little black box, leveraging the rapid advancement of PC components into a standard configuration.
Nothing little
As the
about
PS2
original
launched in Japan,
Xbox. That thing was a
Microsoft
monster.
announced the Xbox.
Not that one, the real one.
It wouldn't release until next year, but Sony's monopoly was going to be tested, and Nintendo were no longer guaranteed second place. It was an exciting time. Technology was cool, and there was nothing but blue skies on the horizon. The arrival of a new millennium had brought a feeling of optimism for the future. We could cast off the clumsy artifacts of the 20th century and embrace a new digital world. Mobile phones and the internet were starting to make a tangible impact on everyday life. We had SMS, we had MSN Messenger.
Yeah.
The internet was young and bristled with opportunity. This was the future, and we were living it.
Facts.
Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, farewell.
Oh my God, yes. That's so true. Like, the year 2000 was the year of the internet. Like, it showed up, kicked the door down, and said, "I'm here, let's go." And we were on a trip, man. Of course, come September 2001, everybody remembers what happened. And everything changed. But up until that time, we had no idea, but everything was awesome. Like, it was the future. There was the internet. We could talk to people around the world instantly. Like, that was bonkers, man. Year 2000 really was like a turning point for technology. And it was amazing. And I'm so jazzed I got to live through it and see it from the eyes of a kid who got to enjoy a lot of that technology. In that respect, I'm really lucky. But tell me down in the comments, if you lived through the year 2000, tell me about your experience, or tell me about some of the artifacts that you have from back during that time and what you enjoyed about it, what sucked about it. Break it down for me, and I'd love to hear from you. Anyway, if you enjoyed the content here on this channel, then please make sure to like and subscribe. I'd love to have you here with us as we grow our community. And if you want to support the channel a bit more directly, then make sure to check out our Patreon. It's only $1 a month, guys, and it gets you a shout out in the video. Until next time, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time. Bye!